Yeah, I was going to be stoic and not mention it, but thank you, Bodhinaga. It's just, it's broken and it's really spiky. So I've got a lump of wax on it at the moment. And if that comes out, I've got a spare one down here. So I might have to stop and do that, but hopefully it'll be all right. So yes, over the past few weeks, we've been exploring attitudes of enlightenment. And we've been looking at the sevenfold puja to do that. The puja that we sometimes do at Sangha night and we do at festivals. And we're looking at how the sections of the puja translate into our daily life, into our daily practice, into what we do every day as part of our daily practice. So first we looked at the worship section, the first section, and we prepared our mind with beauty to receive our honored guest, the ideal of enlightenment. And then we looked at the salutation section and we honored and revered that ideal, cultivating an attitude of reverence. And then we went for refuge in the going for refuge section. And we declared our commitment to that ideal of enlightenment in the body of the figure of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, putting that at the center of our lives, committing to that. And after the going for refuge section, we chant the refuges and precepts. We put those aspirations into words, and we chant the refuges and precepts. And so we come to the fourth section of the puja, the confession section. And we might get a bit uncomfortable having chanted the refuges and precepts, because we might suspect that we're not actually living up to the ideals that we've chanted in the precept. In the confession section, we face up to where we fall short of those ideals. And we acknowledge the harm that we've done to ourselves and that we've done to others in a spirit of accepting and understanding. So I'll just read you the section. Confession of faults. Standing with folded hands before the Buddhas in the 10 directions, before the Bodhisattvas of great compassion, I acknowledge the harm I have caused in this life and past ages, the harm to myself and the harm to others. Standing with folded hands before the guides of the world, I make this aspiration. Such acts in the future I will not do. So confession has always been central to our practice of Buddhism, the Buddha's Sangha. It was absolutely central to being part of the Buddha's Sangha. And in fact, it was a prerequisite to being part of the Buddha's Sangha. And long after the Buddha's death, every 2 weeks on the cycle of the full moon, on the cycle of the moon, the bhikkhunis and the bhikkhus would get together and practice confession. And it's quite important to think of our own conditioning around confession. And it's quite interesting. I absolutely loved it. I was brought up a Catholic. And for me, it was a really positive experience. I really loved it. I went every Saturday, every single week. I loved the solemnity of it. You know, I loved sitting in the confessional, the dark confessional with the crucifix and the grill, and you could just see the priest through the little holes and he could just see you. And I loved the ritual of that. There were magic words that you had to remember. And you had to say these magic words and you didn't get told off. You know, you told all your sins to the priest and you didn't get told off. In fact, you got forgiven for them. God forgave you for your sins. And, you know, I'd come out of the confessional with my holy face on and go and sit down. And then I said my special prayers that the priest had given me, special secret prayers that he'd given me, and my sins would all go away. And so I'd skip home all uplifted and happy with my spotless soul. And in fact, half the time I had to make up the sins that I confessed because I didn't really do very bad things. But, you know, I kind of got it. I got the deal, and I really loved it. Very positive experience for me. But then when I stopped believing in God and stopped believing that somebody else could forgive me in that way, I didn't know what to do with when I'd kind of committed a sin, which I probably might have still said that. When I was feeling terrible, about something I'd done, I didn't know what to do with it. And it was actually that experience that brought me to the Dharma. It was wanting to change, having that feeling of having done something unskillful. I didn't know that word then, but I felt bad about what I'd done. I wanted to change. And the very first conversation I ever had with an order member was about the difference between remorse and guilt, which we'll come on to. And I discovered the Buddhist confession was not at all what I'd known as a child. And I knew that with this kind of confession that I'm going to talk about tonight, I could change. And that gave me great faith. And I skipped home again. Well, I had a little scooter, but I scooted home up the Holloway Road in London with a very happy soul. It wasn't spotless, but I knew that I could change. Others don't have such a positive relationship with confession. So, others have connotations of judgment and guilt, of being a miserable sinner. We have to be forgiven for our sins. And it's really hard to let go of that conditioning, but it's so important that we do let go of that, because Buddhist confession is not about that. I was interested, I always like to look at the meanings of words, and confess is from Latin, and it means to acknowledge together, to speak, to tell, to say. And I looked at the Pali expression for confession, and it's papa desana. So desana means to make known, to point out, to acknowledge. And papa is one of those Pali words that has no direct translation, a bit like metta, that you can't quite translate it properly to get the full meaning. So we have to use lots of different words around the words to try and get a sense of it. And even then it's quite hard, because the culture of the culture that this word came out of is so different to ours. But it's one of the words is faults. So it could be confession of faults. But Bhante Sangharakshita said that's a good word to use, but it's not quite strong enough. But it's one of the words that we use when we're talking about confession of faults. Another word that we will hear and see written in perhaps from other traditions is the word sin. And that comes from much more of a Christian conditioning. We don't use that word. We think of being skillful and unskillful. We're training in the principles. And when we're unskillful, it's that our training has fallen down. So, it's not that we are bad, it's that we haven't trained perhaps quite as hard, or we haven't had as long a period of training as we might need. So we don't think in terms of that. So it's much more helpful, I think, to think in terms of skillful and unskillful, rather than that word sin, that we've done some terrible thing. Another word that Sangharakshita says we need to think about in this thinking about what confession is about is the word evil. And we might come across this in the Puja book. The evil, it says, that I have heaped up through my ignorance and foolishness. So it's really, really important that we see that there is no sense at all in Buddhism that we are evil, but that evil comes into the world from deluded and foolish mind. We think that there's a me in here, and we think there's a separate you out there. That's the delusion. And all the evil in the world comes from that basic delusion. The closest and perhaps the most helpful translation is faults. And so that's what we use in our puja, confession of faults. But any translation has to take into account that, all of this arises out of conditions. And as long as we think we're separate, then those conditions will lead to unskillfulness. So if we have that Christian conditioning around these words of sin and evil, we've just got to shake it off. Shake it off. It's not helpful. Let it go, because it makes absolutely no sense in Buddhism. So why do we have a confession section in the puja? Well, the puja helps us to cultivate attitudes that are helpful in our daily life. That's kind of what it does. And so then, why is confession important in our Dharma life? Why is it important in our daily life? It's kind of as we practice ethics and meditation, we start to notice things that hold us back, things that stop us from growing. And we notice that we have particular unskillful patterns, that there's a particular precept that we keep breaking over and over again. We seem to still do the same unskillful things over and over. And then as we practice ethics and meditation, we become much more sensitive to our ethical behavior. We notice when we're breaking a precept much more. So it's important to recognize and acknowledge all of this. And also we start to notice old guilty memories that block our happiness. We'll talk about guilt later. So this is why confession and acknowledging our unskillfulness is so important, because we realize that parts of us either don't want to change or we feel it's too hard to change. We can get stuck. As long as these things remain private, it's much harder to change. Bhante says that we've got to vomit it up. We've got to vomit it up, even though it's painful, even though it's difficult, even though it's embarrassing and, oh God, I've done it again. It's really important to vomit it up. We must be willing to let these unskillful patterns go in some way, or we'll never make progress. Why? Why does keeping unskillfulness private hold us back? Well, one of the reasons is it can lead to more unskillfulness. It can lead to self-hatred. I'm so terrible. I can't change. I'm so terrible. I've done all these terrible things. It can keep us stuck in stories about how terrible they are, whoever it is that we've been unskillful about, because we don't have any other perspective. We don't have any other perspective to bounce off. It all stays within us. And we can really get stuck in that dynamic of, how terrible they are, as well as being terrible. So it's it's not helpful. Keeping unskillfulness private holds us back because in a kind of a way, we think we're getting away with it. So we continue to do it. So we dig the groove deeper. And this is just like my story. I know this to be true for myself. And because I can't allow you to see the whole me, because of all this stuff that I'm doing and not telling anyone about, it keeps me separate. I'm not acknowledging it. It keeps me separate. If you knew me, if you knew what I was really like, you would reject me. You wouldn't want to be my friend. And this can lead to lies and deception. And it can keep us very isolated because, being isolated and separate is inherently painful because it goes against the truth of the way things are, which is that we are deeply and profoundly connected. Not being ourselves, not acknowledging that we are we have this private set of unskillful patterns. We can't kind of be ourselves with each other. And communication can be difficult. Communication, it can get in the way of our free-flowing communication. We start to do this little dance, that I'll be the person that you want me to be rather than the person that I am. How does confession then take us forward? How does acknowledging these unskillful patterns in ourselves take us forward? Well, one of the things it does, it allows vulnerability. When we're vulnerable I will talk about actually the process of confession, but if we are able to share, then it allows for trust and intimacy and deeper connections. These faults in a way aren't personal. We all do it. It's all part of being a human being. And we're kind of nothing special in that. Saying out loud, whether it's to the Buddha in front of the shrine whether it's to a bodhisattva that we connect with, whether it's to another person, or whether it's just out loud in the peak somewhere. Saying it out loud takes away their power. When we name what we're doing, it gives us freedom. And that gives us a clear conscience, which is bliss. There's nothing that makes me more happy than to have a clear conscience. And if we are lucky enough to have someone that we can talk to about these things, then our friend might say, you've done that before. You know, you've said that before. And that makes it easier to stop. So we can learn from the wisdom of kind friends who can share our own unskillfulness. And it helps us to, over time, we can rejoice in the changes that we're making, even if, you know, we've done it again, but we know we've done it again. That was, you know, I did it, but I knew I was doing it. And I'm not stuck in the old me. I'm not stuck in these patterns. This, we see through that, the Lakshana that says that we are fixed, you know, that we are not fixed, we can change. We see through that idea that we are fixed. We don't have to hide or defend, because that pattern is not me, and we can rejoice in that. And this gives us confidence and faith. So order members and people who are training for ordination will probably have a regular confession practice where they share and reflect on ethical behavior, past and present, in an atmosphere of trust and acceptance and understanding, with a sense of mutual helpfulness. And this really has to be developed over time in an atmosphere of strong Dharma practice and trust. It can be harmful to blurt out to someone who's not ready or able to hear the confession that we want to give. And so in this, you know, if anybody is if this is kind of raising ideas for people, then talk to an order member that you trust. And you know, that and they might even want to set up some kind of a ritual that you might want to do together that will there might be a really strong sense of purification in that. So talking to an order member that you trust might be the first step. The confession section of the puja, though, is a place where you can bring a confession of something that you've done that's unskillful. You can take anything to the Buddha in the puja, in the confession section. And if we are preparing to make a confession during the puja, then we can light the incense, light a candle, and we can see the incense kind of swirling in front of the Buddha, and that can be a representation of the confession that we want to let go, the unskillfulness that we want to let go of. And that can be very, very powerful. So, you know, that we bring our whole self to the Buddha as in the puja. We bring our whole self and let go of the unskillfulness that we've done. It's very important that we choose our time, choose our person. Very important that we don't rush into any sense of confession. Being, you know, it needs to be it's very important who we choose. Because if we talk to somebody that isn't ready to hear, then they might say, oh, don't worry about it, wasn't that bad. Or they might say, oh, it doesn't matter, you know, no one knows about it, you got away with it. Or, you know, don't worry, we all do it. That kind of thing. You haven't been caught out. And that can be really, really painful, because the person that you're talking to doesn't share your values. They don't share how important it is for you to be able to talk about this unskillfulness. And it's always wise to choose very carefully who you talk to about it. And again, I would say that if it's raising something for you, then talk to an order member that you trust. So when we confess, it's really, really important that we we make the distinction between regret, remorse, and irrational guilt. We're going to talk about remorse in a minute. But first of all, we're going to look at guilt, irrational guilt. Sangharakshita talks about 3 aspects of irrational guilt. So we've done something that someone else doesn't want us to do. So this could be a person, it could be a group, it could be our family, it could be a group of people that we belong to in some way. So we've done something that they don't want us to do. And we are dependent on that. The second thing is that we are dependent on that group for approval, for love, and we fear the withdrawal of that if they find out what we've done. The third thing that Bhante talks about is there being a fear of punishment, being found out. And so these 3 things together create a very uncomfortable, very painful, very difficult, unskillful, and very unhelpful, irrational guilt. So we feel like we've done something wrong, but it's perhaps we've just gone against a family norm or a societal norm. We feel terrible, but actually perhaps we've just gone against conventional morality. Perhaps we haven't even broken a precept. And that's why it's very important to pull apart when we feel bad about something that we've done, just to look and see, have we actually broken a precept? Because if we haven't, then there's that. Then we need to really look at what it is that we are valuing and where we are placing our values. And that's a whole interesting set. That's a very important lot of work to do. So it could be to do with our sexuality. It could be a work ethic. I remember spotting this really very, very strong guilt that I used to feel every time I went on retreat. My kids were, 19 and 20 something. And when I first started going on retreat, the first few days of being on retreat, I felt so guilty, felt awful, felt really selfish and self-obsessed, because my family thought I was doing a really terrible thing by leaving the kids and going on retreat. And I just had to keep coming back all the time to, have I broken a precept? And I hadn't broken a precept. In fact, what I was doing was very skillful. So, but still, I felt really awful. What I was experiencing was this irrational guilt. It took a long time to shift, actually. But then what happens is if we look at, if I looked at that, and then I came to the beautiful Dharma, the perfect Dharma, and we can unpick that tangle, the jungle, the thicket where we get stuck. And then we come to the Dharma and we can really see clearly what it is we're doing. And that is when things start to really make sense. And what we're going to look at is 2 aspects of our experience around confession, Hri and Apatrapya. So let's say we have broken a precept. We have broken a precept and we feel bad, but actually it's more about the other person. What we're looking for is the arising of Hri and Apatrapya. And I'll talk about each one separately. So you sometimes see Hri described as positive shame, but that word shame, we don't need it. You will see it described as positive shame, but it's not the kind of shame that blocks us and makes us feel like we're just bad and wrong and worthless. That kind of shame can hang over from our childhood, from life experience. It's not that kind of I am bad shame. It's not that. Hri is beautiful. Hri is about self-respect and dignity. We've let ourselves down in our noble quest. And so that's why it's so good to have the Pali, because those are all aspects of Hri. We've acted in a way that is beneath us. We see that ethics is so beautiful. And we've cultivated ethics in our lives. We've cultivated a beautiful mind full of positive, beautiful ethics. And then we've done something unbeautiful, and it stings. It's ouch. And this is Hri. We've acted in this way, and Hri is how we change if we meet it with awareness and love. So Hri is about dignity and self-respect. We've let ourselves down, but our response isn't taking us down a road of guilt and shame. It's taking us to somewhere where we can let go easily, much more easily, of what we've done, because we're in touch with something beautiful and we want to get back there. So this is Hri, and it's closely related to apatrapya. So apatrapya comes out of relationships with spiritual friends, or a relationship with the Buddha, or a relationship with the bodhisattvas, who are obviously further along the path than we are. Our spiritual friends who are kinder and wiser than we are. People that we look up to, or it could be the Buddha or the bodhisattvas that we look up to. And we behave in a way that when we think if they knew, then again, ouch. If they knew what we'd done, ouch. And I remember a very good example of this was when it was years and years ago, but when I first moved to Sheffield, and I was in town with Vajratara, spent the afternoon with Vajratara, said goodbye, and came to the cash point. I put the card in, asked for £10, and £100 came out. And I went, yes! Oh, my initial response was, yes, that was old me. I've got £100 that I shouldn't have had. But then immediately I just left the really beautiful, I'm talking about the Dharma with Vajratara, and here I was about to make it all grubby. You know, I was about to do something really grubby, and that's not, you know, if Vajratara was standing here, would I go, yes, let's have the money? Probably not. So apatrapya can stop you in your tracks. It's not that kind of, oh, I want to be good. I want to be a good girl so that my big wise friend, the big girls can see how wise I am. That's going to come into it. Of course it is, you know, of course it is. But if we're a little bit more aware, then it will be that I don't want to make my ethical life unbeautiful. I want it to be as beautiful as I witness in my spiritual friends. So it can stop you in your tracks, and like it did for me, thankfully, and I took the money back into the bank. But then if you're too late and you do the thing anyway, reflecting on what your spiritual friends would think of you, or what the Buddha would think of you, it's that kind of thing, isn't it? What would the Buddha do? Or any of the bodhisattvas, then there's immediately an urge to confess. There's an urge to say, or to bring it back to the Buddha, back to the feet of the Buddha. I did this thing and I regret it, and I feel Hri, and I feel like I've let myself down and I want to let it go. It's really important to know that Hri and apatrapya might not feel good. They might feel quite painful, but they're positive mental states. That is the thing that Vishuddhimati explained to me when I first came along to the Buddhist Center. She asked me how I was feeling. She kind of pulled it all apart. And she said, well, that is a very positive mental state that you're in. And it was like, oh, phew, this is good. This is positive. This is going to help me to change. And it gave me such faith. So positive mental states of Hri and apatrapya don't necessarily feel pleasant, but it's how we change, because we don't want to feel like that. So we need to cultivate Hri and apatrapya. How do we do that? We need to cultivate it. And we need to cultivate it, and we can do that by being clear that we're practicing spiritual beings. We're not Buddhas, we're Buddhists. We're not perfect, but we're really trying, and we can feel really good about that. We can rejoice about that. You know, confession on one side, rejoicing on the other, rejoicing in how hard we're trying, and how important we think it is. Just knowing it's important is a reason to rejoice in our practice, and that gives us faith. Another way of cultivating Hri is to really get it clear in our minds that we are not our unskillful thoughts or actions. Our unskillful thoughts and actions are fleeting, they arise in dependence upon conditions, and they pass away again. We don't have to identify with them. There is no essential me in any of those unskillful thoughts or actions. We don't have to identify with them. And we can feel more confident by understanding how Hri arises. So we can cultivate apatrapya by recognizing that there are people wiser and kinder than us. To be receptive to that fact and to people who are further along than we are, and cultivate positive humility and rejoice in them. And, to practice it, see how it feels to bring the Buddha to mind, to bring up the bodhisattva or the special friend that we have, bring them to mind. It doesn't make us feel uncomfortable. Well, it's a very positive mental state. Don't forget, feel uncomfortable. If it's Hri or apatrapya, then that's a very positive thing, and we can rejoice in that. It's very important to rejoice in this practice. It's so tough, so hard, but on the other hand, not letting ourselves off the hook. We can make all kinds of justifications for our private unskillfulness, can't we? But it's important not to let ourselves off the hook. So it's said that confession can only be genuine if we undertake not to repeat the action. And that's a really fantastic aspiration. How beautiful. It's a really beautiful thing, but it's easier said than done. These are very strong habits, and they take a lifetime, many lifetimes, to root out. So we just have to keep acknowledging to ourselves, others, the Buddha, the bodhisattvas, a good friend. And eventually they do erode, they do fade, they do get less. But it's important not to promise to stop doing things in the short term. And it's really important, because if we go back on our promise, we'll undermine ourselves and we'll lose that sense of agency. We'll no longer believe in our own power to make decisions or change. And sometimes, we might not even have a strong intention to stop doing it. We might just say, I'll acknowledge it, but to be honest, I know I'm going to carry on doing it. But that's okay as well. Just to simply acknowledge it is helpful. So part of letting go of these unskillful behaviors that hold us back, there's a few things we can do. Without blame, we can acknowledge what we've done. We can see the conditions that led to the thing that we've done, how these conditions came together in a very certain way, and what arose was the unskillful behavior, and we can acknowledge it without blame, noticing the Hri, noticing that the ouch. If it's beneficial to the other person, we can apologize if it's appropriate. If it's not about us, sometimes I just want to get to that person and say how sorry I am about what I've done, but it might not be right for them. So knowing it's appropriate, we can apologize. We can make amends as best we can. If it's possible, it might not always be possible. And we can commit to trying not to do it again. And then we drop it. We have to drop it. And part of that is forgiveness. Talk about that in a minute. So if we don't drop it, we'll just dig the groove even deeper. It's very important. It's very skillful. Once we've done the very best we can to acknowledge it, to confess it, to apologize, to make amends, to commit to trying not to do it again, then we must drop it. Otherwise, we just dig the groove deeper. We need to get back into positive mental states as quickly as possible. Otherwise, it just stays all about me. We can't be happy and experience all that skillful action promises if we don't drop it, because it cuts you off from other people and opportunities to connect. It keeps us stuck and we can't grow. So another, forgiveness is another aspect of this that might be appropriate, forgiving ourselves. Tara Brach talks about this threefold practice around this, that we feel the ouch, we feel the hri, we feel the apatrapya, we acknowledge what we've done, and then we connect out into all the people in the world who are probably feeling exactly the same thing right now. We connect out. So it's not all about me. We're connected to every other human being in the world who's doing probably exactly the same things we are. So we connect out and we have a sense of compassion for them and for us. And we can say the words, I forgive myself, or forgiven, just forgiven. And that helps us connect into forgiveness for others. If we can forgive ourselves, then we're much more likely to forgive others. So not letting our unskillfulness be a reason to be separate. We are deeply, profoundly, connected. We are. And if we allow unskillfulness to keep us separate and to not drop, if we don't drop the let go, forgive, and move on, then it's very difficult to feel connected. And that's my talk.